There is nothing more important to any politician, be they local or global, than money. They don't always want to admit it, but that cold hard cash makes all the difference in being elected and giving a really bad concession speech if you lose. Recently, a political consultant pleaded guilty to charges he illegally set up the spending between a 2012 congressional campaign and one of those dreaded and at the same time beloved Super PACs, which brings us back to the issue of campaign funding and following the sometimes dirty money. Our guest is senior counsel with the Campaign Legal Center in Washington, D.C., where he has specialized in campaign finance, ethics, and election law for more than a decade. Paul Ryan joins us today. Paul, thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Paul, this is an interesting case. Tyler Harbor, accused of managing a congressional campaign while helping create and direct a Super PAC that spent $325,000 attacking a rival candidate. Honestly, though, is it any shock whatsoever that this happens? Because it would seem to a lot of people who just read on the surface that stuff like this goes on all the time.
Well, I think this is the most brazen violation of the coordination laws that I've seen in the almost 20 years I've been doing this sort of work. But it was really, for that reason, low-hanging fruit for the Department of Justice to go after this guy and end up getting a plea agreement from him. One interesting aspect of this is that the Federal Election Commission, the agency that's charged with the responsibility of enforcing federal campaign finance laws, was nowhere to be seen in this matter. They were not involved. They did not catch on to this. They were not part of the prosecution.
Is the FEC then just part of the problem? Because you're not the first person that I've talked to who basically has told me that they're not doing their job.
Well, I agree they're not doing their job. One of the problems is the structure of the agency. It has 6 members, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, one Democrat, one person who's identified generally as a Democrat, but he self-identifies as an independent. But at any rate, it's split 3-3, and the agency deadlocks on any important enforcement matters.
Is it simply impossible then, the way it is set up, to really enforce any sort of campaign finance law?
I wouldn't say impossible, because the agency worked pretty well for a couple of decades. It's only been within the last 6 or 8 years that the agency has become mired in gridlock, largely along ideological lines.
So how do you then fix that? Because it seems as if what we're talking about here is going after libertarians, Democrats, Republicans. Seems to me like you have to have a complete, almost a citizen review board here, somebody with no desire to actually get involved or have connections to politics, when in fact they all do.
I think short of restructuring the agency to have an odd number of members, you could take the much simpler route of just appointing people to the commission who actually believe in the campaign finance laws and take seriously the responsibility of enforcing them. That's not quite what we've got today.
But you don't see that happening anytime soon?
No, I don't see that happening anytime soon.
All right, there's part of the problem here. Now, with regard to these Super PACs, I mean, there's no doubt we have Scott Walker, Jeb Bush. A lot of people right now are using Super PACs. There's no doubt that they will as we get close to the election cycle here. So is there any real way to find out what they're doing, to hold somebody to the fire here? It seems as if this is like completely out of control.
I think the most interesting development in the 2016 presidential race that's in its early stages now is that you have individuals like Jeb Bush who deny that he's even testing the waters of a campaign, yet he's set up a Super PAC and has reportedly set a goal of $100 million for fundraising for the first quarter. Now, federal campaign finance law has said for decades that even just activities to test the waters of a federal candidacy must be paid for with money raised under the $2,700 candidate limit. Most of the major contenders for the 2016 nomination are ignoring that law, and the FEC has given no indication that they're going to be enforcing the law anytime soon.
Are these Super PACs one of the most dangerous things that we face now in American presidential politics?
I think they're particularly dangerous when they're being run by federal candidates or office holders, or folks who may be denying that they're going to be federal candidates, but everyone knows that they really are going to be the candidates running in 2016. And here's the reason they're dangerous. Congress and the courts have said for decades that big contributions directly to candidates pose a big threat of corruption, and these Super PACs are being used to evade the candidate contribution limits.
Would the American people be surprised if they were to look into a lot of these various political campaigns and find out just how much corruption there really is?
Surprised? I doubt it. I don't think you'd see much surprise on that front.
Because why? Most American people believe that there's corruption there regardless?
I think people have become cynical, particularly in the last 5 years since the Supreme Court stepped into the political fray and decided Citizens United and really unleashed a flood of unlimited money in our federal elections. Now, the court promised 2 things in that decision. One, that the money would be transparent, meaning fully disclosed, and the second, that it would be raised and spent independently of candidates. We're just 5 years from that decision, and we have very little of the promised disclosure, and the money is being raised by candidates themselves. It's hardly independent from the candidates.
And let's see if the Justice Department goes after something other than low-hanging fruit. Paul Ryan, fascinating stuff. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. When we come back, a word to the anti-vaxxers from the Surgeon General.